and welcome to Finance Thrive, where we're talking about all things financial and hoping to help you meet your financial goals. Welcome to Finance Thrive, where we're talking all things finance and helping you meet your financial goals. Please smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Please stay with us. It's kind of a lengthy video, but I will leave in the show notes down here that I took of my father, particularly where he talks about the salary of teachers back then. Teaching was 20 years. He was the first in his family to go to college. He came from a family of farmers, and he's my hero. He talks about when he was in school back in the 40s and the 50s.
Mobile was the nearest major town near Sims Chapel, Alabama. It's Washington County, probably the poorest county in Alabama. One of the poorest, but it's right adjacent to Mobile County. And I say this for a lot of reasons because there's so much difference in the two counties. We didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. And the houses were built very poorly, most of them. There were areas such as the town of Citronelle, which was well developed, was done so by Yankees, and named for a flower. But Sims Chapel was a little rural community with a thriving sawmill economy. Pine products, you had turpentine, paper wood, which fed into the mills in Mobile, Alabama. So that road work, that is the building of roads and keeping and maintaining them, and the school system and the sawmill and farming, what little bit there really was in Washington County, on small scales, because most everyone had a garden, and that's pretty much what it was, You think of the South as a cotton growing area. Washington County was not one of those. They had some, and later on in life, my dad found out about those, and I wound up having to work the stuff, But that was really the real economy until later on in 1940, 48, 49, 50, after my great uncle Tom Clark came back. He was living in Texas, working as a civil service job with the Air Force in Corpus Christi, Texas. Well, he and Frank Bork, and our congressman at the time, knew each other real well and had been childhood friends. And Frank Bork moved him to Brooklyn Air Force Base in Mobile to work there while he could go around and gather signatures to obtain the land from our great-grandfather, because it was a lot of land. And he did this in order to drill for the chlorine, salt, if you will, please, and which these two major factories were developed. But we had these electricity as well. We had 3 schools in Mobile County. They actually had 4, but they had that said. The mother, which actually taught there, not exactly like some of the old mill towns, but they were well off. Getting off that, I've got to get back to the education. Well off, but to go back to the gardens, basically the 50 people, they were growing the corn, the logging industry, okra, the peas, our beans, case called butter beans, and all the same person. There's types of the logging land, peas, the whole bit. And let me give this breakdown. And I've got other studies. Not as much with we didn't work. Things we drove the school system. That's where we all started out. System, sugar cane. I mentioned we had 3 schools. So this was a burden on any most everyone had in the fall of the year. And as of course, we lived off the garden with my dad for being an all-male town and moving around. It had still kind of a tough time with it, which is connected with the post office. John Nelson, this place at 7th Chapel started at 9, adult life. Because that, but that was becoming another little place who he was to be. It's shy. It's spelled not he only had a fifth grade education. SYHAN. Man, he was started in the river. We did have a cruise and train service. Tell you exactly how to see it through the town that day. But they stopped at 7th Chapel. That post office and that little middle store. And by the way, later on, built a place to vote there, which I haven't before. 7th Chapel is in Washington County. And Washington County at one time covered a great portion of Mississippi and Alabama. It kept broken down to just a little normal size county. I'll have to relate back again to the fact that the food is coming from the gardens. Some people had a milk cow, some didn't. Most everyone raised hogs, and that was a source. Very few people raised cattle. Mr. John Johnston did. He had a pretty big herd. It run wild. We didn't have any stock laws. Stock laws being with the cattle, and it must be fenced. They were not fenced. I mean, they ran around out in the country. They'd go and gather around. They're building, homes at night, and make an awful noise and leave a big mess in your yard when they left. Which, on a subject of yards, let me mention that we didn't have grass in our yards. We'd rake that, we'd cut that grass off the yards and sweep the yards with the dirt. Funny, right? Mm-hmm. so it must have come to me as a real shock when I visited my father-in-law's place for the first time. I like that lawn that you could eat a meal off of, just beautiful. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really did come as a shock, because I didn't know people raise that crazy stuff I used to dig up, grass to sweep. So in order to sweep the yards, that's how we cleaned them. We didn't mow them. We didn't have to have a lawnmower, thank God. But just get us.
Now I know why you never mowed.
But we had like a broom, sweep, and just gallbeers. That's what it grows near wetlands, in the wetlands, or the edge of wetlands. And all of them, we call them big flats, not wetlands. We didn't know what a wetland was. We knew they were wet, but we didn't know they called them wetlands. Mm-hmm. But a lot of stories about those, by the way. There's 8 acres and acres and acres and acres of those. And the soil was really not very good for anything except wetlands and timber. Mm-hmm. It did grow good timber, but not as good as the hills. And not using a guide here, I'm getting into trouble real fast. But I'm still bitching off the education. So you see, it wasn't a lot. We had to know how to cipher, read, do arithmetic. You had to know that. So multiply, divide, add, and subtract. That was pretty much the functions of mathematics. And in reading, some of us succeeded, some didn't. But to say that, to sum it up, there was nothing in 7th Chapel, Alabama, but just some good people. Hard workers, there's daylight and dark, and by golly, when it went dark, it got dark because we didn't have electricity. We had lamps. We had to read anything at night. You had to have a fireplace or a good lamp, kind of like Abe Lincoln, So it wasn't much reading went on in my house during the night. As a matter of fact, there's no reading at night in my house. We did most of that in the daytime, if we had any daylight left where we could read. But fortunately, later on, in early youth, we did get a newspaper, and I did read it, especially the funny papers, the comics, if you will. Dick Tracy, I remember him. He came to Mobile one time. But it was, I was in there. That's really never been. Let's say, education. Everything's education. Let's face it. Technology. God, what in the world is that? That's the very reason I started writing this book. Is just to measure the kind of have some measurement of technology's growth, and it just mind-boggling. We got electricity in 1949. I was 10 years old, and then things began to happen. But I had, at the age of 7, I was introduced to power, because the house got smaller somehow. Just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, porch, stairs. By the way, it was the back porch. It wasn't the front porch. That's where we did our washing. Dad did his shaving. I say washing clothes. And we had a shallow well, right where you could actually stand on the porch and draw the water, like with a windlass. And it was about 35 feet deep, so all this depth. And of course, they didn't have chlorine in that stuff. So that led to some real health problems, such as teeth, and bones. And while I'm on the subject of teeth, we didn't have toothbrushes. We did. So these fancy places down Citronelle, they did, but we didn't. We had these old hickories. You go out and sit on a hickory tree, which we had plenty of those around the area, and we'd take your knife and just cut your little stick, and just cut the ends of it. Just make your bristles out of the ends of one of the sticks, and we did have at our disposal some soda, bicarbonate soda.
Mm-hmm.
We used that and then to brush our teeth with. If you get the kids to brush their teeth,
Mm-hmm.
That was a real problem too, by the way. I remember going in the Navy, and they had so many people up around the country that came in there doing the same thing we had done. And the folks were pretty much all alike, because we were that middle class. What is middle class? There's no such thing out there in the country. There's 2 or 3 people maybe in the whole 20-mile radius that might have a house, a good house, with all the amenities. Most of them, not all of them, but they were just the lucky ones, and they inherited somehow, got a hold of it, stole it, or whatever. But what I'm getting to is DC battery power that this Dad was going to build onto the house so we'd have room for the family. Because by that time, we had 5 boys as children. And here we were in these 2 bedrooms and a lean. There was a lean-to. I forgot about that. There's the kitchen, and I had a bed in there too. But it was tight living. And the kitchen, it was so small. That was the first house, that you really didn't do much. Wasn't able to do much there at all. And of course, back porch, washing of clothes, there. But before I start school, I want to relate some things that are really bad stuff, I haven't gotten into being born yet. That's like this theme. I was little talk we're supposed to do in school, in high school later on. And there was one of these boys. He came in. He said he had his process. That's what I was going to do. Talk about a process, and his process was striking a match. And I never will forget that as long as I live. And so such a simple thing. So he went through this process of how he moved his fingers and But he did all this stuff, and then there it was. He said, something you've never seen before, and there was here again, a flame. I created a flame. He says, well, sir, you just got a F. So what do you mean I just got an F? He says, you forgot to take the match out of the box. So we were kind of like that as far as our growth educationally down in Chapel, Alabama. We hadn't been taken out of the box yet. Okay, picking up, we're talking about a process and the match, not getting the match out of the box. Well, I'm going to step back just a bit on education and make note of the fact that our neighboring county, Mobile County, which is at the time was a very large seaport, and still is somewhat, but not as much as it was at that point in time. The county had an absolutely excellent school system, be matched to done by anyone, anywhere. And I started school there in that county. It's a school called Calvert Elementary School, about 11 miles away from home, and which was taken by bus there. And but I had well, actually, Christmas time before that, my parents had given me a chalkboard, a little chalkboard with the alphabet and the numbers, 1 through 10. Like we on base 10, as most people know math know. So he taught me my numbers, and he taught me my alphabet at age 4. And of course, I would attend school with my brothers. The teachers would allow that in Calvert Elementary. And I'd go to school with them and sit there and do the same work they did. And of course, at the time, I believe my brother was in the 4th grade. That's when I was first. I would do their homework with them. And that, along with the fact that they aroused my curiosity for education. And that drawing horses and faces of people, you know. So it put me at a distinct advantage, much better than what we have now, these daycare centers, you know, where there's the hordes, you know, and where they're just one-on-one, if you will. And I was blessed too by having, when I did get to school, I had just a fantastic first grade teacher. And just she's a beautiful lady, unmarried, thought very in a social setting, if you will, you know, feeling like it was her education, her job to educate these kids and take care of their health too. So she would take kids home. Actually, with her, she lived in Mobile, but roomed out at a place called Joe Nader's. He had a home. That's where she lived, boarded. But he had a restaurant and many other ways of making a living, you know, beehives and this nature. But she taught us to draw, to make music. She was a musician too, and just a delightful person, delightful. I'll never forget it as long as she lived. She did get married before I left school, and she became a Gladys Richardson Ward. But yeah, that's one of my real blessings in life. You know, I have to give her most all of my credit for where I am today. You know, maybe that's not a good comparison, but I know it's not when it comes to vocabulary. Right now, I'm getting old and forgetting words, forgetting how to even say it, what it's supposed to be. You know, that's why I like running writing. By the way, I just leave a blank there, and I come back. I'll think of it later. Sometime about midnight, I'll wake up and I remember that word. But I had this great advantage over most. And but going back to the system, Washington County they did some good educating, I suppose. But in the 2nd grade, that is a time that my dad decided the house was too little, and we had to. And plus, he was getting tired of the way we were having to attend school, driving so far. 11 miles was too far, not to become like it was later on, 97 miles one way, which later in the 8th grade this happened to me. But I learned the cursive system of writing, and I went to the school in Washington County that did not teach cursive writing. It was printing, and I had no idea how to print. I didn't tell anyone that. I just took a book, started net copying out of books, and loved the typing set. Is different. So I had all kind of ways to write a B or an F, a G, or H, just name it. I could cross a T without leaving the page. And but that said, I had a real job. I remember that it was kind of frustrating. It was very frustrating. And the teacher was just an old gal, that must have been 60 years old. Teaching something came out of the 19th century. And but somehow I got through that. But the reason I bring that on is we had to move to go to that school, and make room for my grandfather to come in and remodel the house. Actually, more or less build it, because it's so small that before we left, to have it redone. But anyhow, my grandfather did do that, and of course, I mentioned here too.
That's Grandfather Richardson, right?
That's Crosby Richardson. I'm going back to my education. I thought, and I just loved it, going to school. I really did. That's funny too. I had two brothers that hated it. They absolutely hated it, and it showed it too. In the 8th grade, we all wound up the same grade, same class. And that was not healthy for my older brothers, nor me, because I had skipped the grade, which I did intend to point out, which I didn't. When the Mobile County, even though they were much more advanced, they only had 11 years of school to graduate, just 11th grade. So, and then Washington County had 12. And so all you had to do basically was go from one county to the next. It elevates you. When you went back, you didn't go, they didn't set you back. You see what you could do. And I knew the system, but they wouldn't let my parents wouldn't let me play it. I played it 1 year, and that was it. But I messed that one up by playing hooky. I was too young to be with that crowd. I didn't advance the year, and I started school early in my life. And so, you see, I'm just a little tight coming around these teenagers, that already had hair on the chest. And so I was easily led, but not easy to fight with, because I try to get my way all the time. A little bit spoiled, I'd say, looking back. But the truth is, I loved education. But that particular year, I'd rather roll dice and play cards and hitchhike up and down the roads, which you had to wait an hour or two, sometimes 3, before you catch a ride, Lifetime, because I've been a little bit old, I got to the school that I really wanted, reform school. It had the uniforms, reform school. And I knew about another, getting more into the education aspect of it. I mentioned that we lived so far away, and we didn't have any lights, and the education we got, really had to be, from the teacher in the classroom itself, And I mentioned I had the great fortune of starting out in Calvert Elementary School, which is a really Class A elementary school. But and when I say Class A, I mean we had this fine outdoor toilet. And we, of course, went door toilet. But we had kind of a family situation there, because Clarence Lucas, who was just a super principal, and his niece was, I'm trying to think of her first name, but Mrs. Lucas. She became the principal after he left to go to Citronelle High School, to become principal there. And you, like David, talking to you now, he he was a musician, good pianist. But I'm trying to tell this in. Mrs. Lucas was a big baseball fan. And World Series came along, she stopped everything. And her class and some other kids that wanted to watch the World Series watched the World Series. And I kind of had a thing for her daughter, Gladys Lucas. And she was a pretty little thing, let me tell you. But going on in the first I never did go to the 5th grade. I skipped that. But the 4th grade, we had just about music programs. They just fabulous music, public school music teacher. I'm trying to think of his name. It's not coming to me right offhand, but just that super. And we would, once a year, we'd get together, all the schools in Mobile County in that particular grade level would get together and sing. And the big, what is now the center where they do their orchestral performances. And a little side note there on the orchestral, I felt like I got just a first class education there, and which was totally lacking in what would be middle grades. We call them elementary, because I left Calvert to go to McIntosh, which added another 10 miles or so to the route on the same bus. To go to McIntosh Elementary School. And of course, that's when I had already caught up with Robert in elementary school. And we had a sororitas teacher, Janice Wiggum. I'll call her name because she deserves it. But all she knew how to teach was how to use a ruler on the back, coming around hitting everybody on the back. So my brother finally took it away from her. The schools, getting back to those, I'd go to McIntosh, and it was really I didn't fit. It just wasn't education for me, really. It wasn't. I don't think I learned a thing there, not except how to smoke a Lucky Strike, a cigarette. But so the next year we went back to Calvert. And of course, I was going into I went to 7th grade there. And we were mentioning the arts program and the academics of that school system. They had plays at Christmas time. And of course, the 7th grade is pretty much dominated the play, And of course, I might add, it was our classes. There were 3 classes in one room, and just a row of 7th grade, a row of 6th, a row of 5th. That's how big the school was. Give you an idea. Mm-hmm. And we went through we went through 7th grade, and so I had this big dream of going back to Washington County, going back up in the 9th. My parents wouldn't let me. So that was too far ahead of myself already. And by that time, I'd already called Alma, the oldest brother. So all 3 of us in the same classroom together. We went into Leroy High School, and which I don't know why I say what school, because we didn't. That's the year we began to really do some exploring. Up and down that highway, and unfortunately, maybe it should have been fortunate, but we didn't heed the advice. I had an aunt, Uncle Foster's wife, named Nellie Clark. Mm-hmm. She was principal of that school in Wayville, and the bus stopped there to drop off students and pick up some more. So, but there was a big creek down, a swimming hole down near that school, and we'd always have a set of dice with us. We'd go down on that creek bank, swim, and we'd save our lunch money. We see they'd give us lunch money back then, which I need to go back and color elementary lunches. But But we'd sit and have some junk food, we call it these days, you know. Stuff we'd go to these stores, you know, and get us some candy or whatever, you know. Mostly because Coca-Cola it cost 5 cents. And then it'd go, well, in that same year, I'd be went up 6 cents. You had to have a penny to go with a nickel. And they didn't make change either, by the way. So I'm almost embarrassed to even say this, but I did 100. I forget. It wasn't a full 180 days or whatever it is nowadays, or 200 days in some cases. It wasn't because of the economy, even though it really wasn't a farming economy. There in Washington County, Alabama, we still had that old, observing the farmers' economy, you know, his calendar. So we usually got out in May, early May, and so we could help with the farm, help with the actual, in that case, turpentine and that sort of thing, and of course we had to have Bible school too, you know. So, okay, ready? All right. Going back, mentioned playing hooky. It must have been about 160 days around that I went to actually play hooky that particular year. Maybe not that much, but because I did. Well, we had this very strict principal, but he had a troublesome time catching us. But I don't recall a heck of a lot, except that I had 2 brothers in the same class with me, and that just really a mixed up bunch of kids in the 8th grade, the Leroy. And just want to make, because you can imagine homework didn't exist for us. Wouldn't have I'd been in school every class every day, because we wouldn't have had time to do it. We didn't have study halls to do it in. In other words, all we had is a motivator around there was a baseball bat used as a disciplinary tool. Baseball bat or board, you always had your choice, you know. But I didn't really visit that room but one time, and somehow I got out of that. One thing, my dad insisted that, because of our changing our grades and bringing his good report cards home, those F's turned into A's real easily, you know. Just drop the line down, crossing that, make it look good. And I do remember too that I like to draw faces of people. And also, I'd like to draw horses, and that's pretty much how I occupy myself on buses during the daytime. But at nighttime, man, let me tell you, I was all over looking to girls, you know, to hug. You know, that's about all we can do, all we knew how to do, you know. but the dog scene, but really began to take on more responsible chores at home too. You know, turpentining and. Going back, I guess stepping back just a ways there, the benefit of me played hooky. It taught me probably the best lesson I've learned in my lifetime. No, because I did change the F's to A's, which didn't go over a bit at all, you know, my parents, my dad particularly. And you did not want to be disciplined to your dad. You know, I did. Because he'd sit there and talk to you about 2 hours, shame you to death. And of course, plus the fact he had witnesses. He had a solid witness. He had his sister-in-law, Nellie Clark, the principal. She would see us get off that bus. When she couldn't catch us, she made sure that Dad found out about it. But, well, I say that, and I think sometimes he didn't know about it, because at the end of the year, you know, when we didn't pass, you know, then something was obvious. We got our whipping all right, but the bus driver almost got one too. You know, he was threatened pretty badly, and the superintendent did too, because he should have known about this and he didn't know about it. I think Nellie just did her own discipline, you know, just chewing us out, and the principal of the high school, let me tell you, Palmer, Joseph Palmer was his name. And as I say, his only reason for being as a cat, a baseball bat and a board, which you had a choice of. And by the way, you didn't want either one of them because he should not have been given that type of corporal punishment at all. But he probably came up to us. He called us one day. What we'd do is we'd try to make it back to that bus. Well, we'd have to catch it on the road. Back all the way back to which we had to go all the way hitchhike back to Leroy High School, which we hadn't been to yet, and hide aboard that bus to the school let out, and then going home. Well, he called it that trick. And by the way, if it was raining, it was something we couldn't get in the bus or some such thing. But there was walkways, crawlways under the space under the school. We could always go. You know, we knew where they were, and they always go down there where they had kept the cove. You know, the heat in the school. You had those old engines. I'm trying to think what you call them. Boilers. Yeah. We'd go down and hang out there a lot and smoke. Yeah, we did a lot of smoking. And then the baseball, that was a good education there, baseball tournaments and things like this. And I did play a little bit. It was just too much work because I had that long ride home usually. Did a lot of experiences, to tell you the truth. Yes, picking up where I left off, being a bad year, it really was. But again, I probably gained more from it than I lost. As I've just mentioned separately here to David, that it taught me a little bit of discipline and how to go about getting my goals and start reaching for my real goals instead of horsing around and doing crazy things. It brought me closer to a belief in God too, you know. So okay, so I began again. Literally going to Washington County High School. After which I might go back and add the fact that Joseph Palmer, the principal at Leroy, gave us the opportunity to pass, every one of us. He got the whole pack together. Our superintendent of education was elected, and Theodore Pearson, and he had let you know that my dad went to Chatham. That's where the Board of Education had its offices. And he got pretty strong on Theodore Pearson, as good as he was to the family about letting them know who they were, you know. And my dad really let him have it. He said, these kids are not going to be riding that far to school. There's a school about 26 miles from home, and we go in 94, you know, getting there. And getting back home. And it's not going to happen anymore. And so they did manage to sell a bus out. They would not go in there any farther than our house. So we lived on the northern side of Seventh Chapel, the northern edge of it, as a matter of fact. But we were more at Seventh Chapel than we were at Seaboard, at Tibby. And but anyhow, because our family, that's where Mother's family are all from, that area north of us, you know. And so we were really among kinfolk then when we decided to go to Chatham. Really a different ball game, just totally, because I was guilty enough, I felt guilty enough that I needed to get my life back in order, you know, and which did. And of course, from then on, it was the report card indicated true A's and D's, you know, about every 6 weeks. I shouldn't say it was every 6 weeks, but I was on a roll. And of course, I'd run across a guy who should be anything but a scholar. His name was John Henry Baxter, because he was driving and doing paperwooding with his dad, and But anyhow, we became close friends. We joined the band together, the high school band, and we became close friends for many years after that, we went on through, I left college, went in the Navy. And it was a very good relationship, learning and helping each other, when we needed goods, And it challenged him too, to do better on his grades, and he did. And so we were in the ninth grade, and that's all these good subjects like shop, FFA, well, that's not a class, but but we had, what they call it, agriculture. Had 2 periods of agriculture. So you get 2 periods of agriculture, you got band, you got English, you got PE, history, no elective, of course, business. Oh, it comes down to business, but then they have typing. And that's business law and all that stuff, But man, let me tell you, I was in trouble immediately with typing. Because about those eras, you never took a typing class back in those days. You don't know what trouble it is. I'd get behind you had to count so many words off every mistake you made, type. And anyhow, I'd wind up having to go in there on Saturday sometimes and catch up on the typing. We didn't have any typewriters at home, no such thing. All we had there was a guitar on the bed, and time to pick it up and play it. And it was long about then too that guitar got me in trouble one day, one Sunday, as a matter of fact, with Reverend Stockdale. That was a preacher at the time. He had a big family. They'd come to have dinner with us quite often. But this particular Sunday, somehow we had some extra guests. And of course, by the way, that was it, chicken on Sunday, chicken. Saturday, we'd do all this stuff on Saturday, prepare cakes and all that stuff. And the chicken, you had to kill a chicken, wring his neck or cut his head off on the clothesline, to get rid of the blood, and then go in and scald it and then pick those feathers, especially those pin feathers, little young, chickens. Fryers, they call them. That's between a baby and a hen or a rooster. But that's one particular day. This was a country singer by the name of Little Jimmy Dickens. He just wrote a song called "Take an Old Tater and Wait." Everybody else is eating chicken. And I'm talking in real life now, me, and everybody else is in there, me by myself I just got me an old cold tater and started eating those potatoes and singing. And I picked up the guitar and lights on, and I was like to play it. And took some of that song and made sure everybody in that house heard me. And boy, the next thing I saw was a belt coming out flying through that door. And I ate my cold potato and I waited. So I was not so rude to the guests in the future. But that year, we tried to take band. Best thing I ever did. The very best thing I ever did. I got to meet some nice kids, and they were, Dave, I'm talking to you now. You know the difference, in the band student and the rest of the students. It's just a different class of kids, and it made you want to excel, and you got this band director, he starts yelling at you, phrase, phrase, phrase. I had no idea what a phrase was. I didn't like it in English, didn't know what it was in English, didn't care what it was in English, didn't care what it was in music, but phrase, phrase, phrase. And it took me many, many years to figure out what a phrase was. I was in college when I figured it out. and I got the phrases in music and the phrases in English all mixed up. So anyhow, I am real happy with being in that beginning band, and I had an old C melody saxophone that school had. And then I went to the oboe, and then I went to the bassoon, and I went to that, and they were all bad instruments, they really were. Back in those days, they didn't make good quality instruments. And these were pretty old as it was. But the C melody sax is a real social instrument. It's different than key of C, of course. And you play right along with the piano player's music too, you know, and read right off his score, you know. But, and so my grades had picked up to where they're supposed to have been. As a matter of fact, that's the first time I've been in class in a while, you know. It's been a year since I've been in class. But things got much better, and we had this fantastic PE teacher named Billy Joe Williams. He loved to hunt. He taught driver's education as well as civics and history. He made it interesting too, by the way. But the PE class was unusual, really unusual. He taught physical education, but he also had the intramural. That what I learned in that class was unbelievable. You know, I really realized we learned to stand on our head and do all kind of stuff, you know, I'd never heard of, you know, before. And but I got a lot. I think school was just about out before I had enough Saturdays in to catch up with my typing and make an A, you know. But at least I learned how to type. It didn't do me any good these days though with computers. You know, I can stop and do what I want to do. I do like my doctor does. You take one thing, you go over that thing and be fast as I could back then, you know. And so I don't know how people do it these days. With the one finger, two fingers, three fingers, and you can't see me on that. I don't think. But anyhow, it was a very successful year, and of course next year I had to look forward to being in the real bands, you know. Okay, ready now. The ninth grade, very exciting year. I was able to take, as I mentioned earlier, I think somewhere along the way, that they had FFA and had agriculture. Being an agricultural, well, supposedly agricultural community, that was a natural thing to do, to study agriculture. And we had shop, where we learned to use shop tools, do mechanics. But the biggest thing I learned in the ninth grade was how to know about cows. And we didn't really have any cows, so we did add some milk cows. And so, anyhow, we studied beef production. So, and of course, most everyone in the class entered the FFA contest for raising beef cattle, you know, getting a steer and raising it and fattening it for the stockyards, you know, to sell. So that was a biggie. That's the year really that I think I got the years messed up as far as the football team that Robert and I had a clash with. But that was the year. That's the year that things opened up for me. That I mentioned typing, that really beginning to be a little bit better. And again, that year we were able to take an extra course. So we actually had a course, we didn't have a teacher. Me and John Henry and I had this course, and we studied on our own. And the teacher would, of course, grade our papers, give us a test, and grade our papers. It was business law. Business law, and this opens some grand doors, you know, for understanding and doing typing and FFA. And did I mention math anywhere?
No.
I didn't. I was, believe it or not, that year we were totally lacking in math. And we had a study hall. And which reminds me of a cousin named Frida Knapp. That's Agnes Knapp's sister, for the sake of David here, sitting here by me. Well, anyhow, some funny stuff. We would wound up doing more talking than we did studying. And to be honest with you, knew very little about the library system. Didn't learn a thing about that. But we just used it pretty much as a talking hole. Sitting calling by ourselves with some girls and Johnny and I forget who the other guys were. It was about 9 or 10 of us at the table. But we was a chatterbox, what that was. This is where, this point in my life where I began to work on a graduate degree in smoking. We had this dugout at the baseball field. We would always go report to, because they had a place for us to go and get away from the crowd to smoke. And that side they signed us a teacher who was a shop teacher, Mr. Quimby. Very nice guy, and of course this is where I really got to know Mr. G.H. Gavin, an inspiration too in his own right. Even though he did say praise, 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 he demanded praise, 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 and he had one of the best bands in Alabama. I don't know how, but he did. But he had married an English lady while he was in World War II. I think that's all he did in service, was play a saxophone, and married this girl from Britain. And, but he was a master at that, even though he was the band director. He was also the assistant principal, the only assistant principal. And so that kind of goes hand in hand, doesn't it? But if you remember, maybe you don't have any reason to remember, but Alabama, you can get a degree in anything and be a principal. I mean, you don't get paid. In other words, you can be a band director, and get paid on your master's and doctorate level because you didn't know what got a doctorate. It wasn't necessary, that sort of thing. But that's when I kind of settled down on saxophone, and of course I played alto for a while, and of course went to baritone, and I love the baritone sax. I loved it. I loved the bass line, the baritone line, and things were getting better and better and better. And that year, my parents couldn't afford band instruments. I mean, that was a total luxury. And most of the kids in the band did have school instruments. Now they weren't bought those big expensive instruments. Although back in those days they weren't that expensive, but they were expensive for most of the people of Washington County, Alabama. So the instruments were pretty well worn too. I mean, they were in bad shape and sweet and small. But we turned out probably more all-state band members than anybody in the state, believe it or not. That little country town, even though it was the county seat, China. But it was a dedicated band director who lived and breathed. But he was a good, and also G.H. was a good, G.H. Gavin, was a good English teacher, superb. He was one time the head of the department at Livingston University, English department. And but I learned a lot from that very, very responsible and leader, because he was one. But I guess he got tired of the pay that the teachers got back in those days, $2,000 or $3,000 a year. And it was bad. For someone, 4,000 was the max. And around that time, band directors were just almost non-existent. That really, you get a job after a couple of years in college, easy, good jobs, good band director jobs. But there was a good solid core of good band directors in Alabama at the time too, and with a good leadership in the University of Alabama, to helping the folks was Colonel Butler, and a well-known gentleman. And he pretty well led the state, in the development of good band directors. Of course, Livingston got in on the job, Troy State, and Jacksonville, some of the other colleges. They were state colleges then, and gone from everything normal schools and girls normals and all the way up. And as a matter of fact, Livingston University, well, it's now West Alabama University, but it was almost built in Sims Chapel, Alabama. And politics kept it out, you know. John Johnston, the same John Johnston that I'm talking about, that more or less raised my father, is the one that fought it. And remember, I said that my dad only had a 5th grade education. That would have been something for us to have had something like that there in that little place, you know. Now, I didn't mention my mother's education. She got married in the 11th grade, and so she finished her high school work with at what is the name of that school, correspondence school, graduate school. And by the way, I did too. I got anxious at one point. I want to get out and get a merchant marine, like my uncle did, you know, 15. So, but I kept trying to get out, and I finished middle school. I finished my high school diploma before I got finished my real one. And I guess that, and let me remind you of a teacher I had that year. His name was Mr. Harris, an alcoholic. I didn't have to question whether he was or not. I would do it for him. I'd take his. I'll let the world know about him too, because he lived. He's from Mississippi. He'd go up and get drunk and hungover and not be to school on Mondays, and he had, and of course we loved having him after lunch. You know, we really did. We'd have our lunch and we'd come back at when we had a period where we'd go out and play some football, and come back and go to class, science class, if you want to call it that. And he'd be asleep on his desk, and we'd whisper and the whole period, you know. And he'd be at that as a hornet, you know, when he'd wake up and the period was about over, you know. But he finally got fired. Came in too late one Wednesday. It's not on Monday. So the principal this time, John L. Porter, one of the finest educators ever, went ahead and taught the rest of his year for him. And he was just an outstanding teacher. I'll never forget that. He's the one that got me to thinking science, scientific terms, and it went right along with my American school classes I was taking. And they were pretty strict too, by the way, they're grading. I recall very vividly, think of something that no one has ever thought of before. And we're going to give reports on it next week. And that was a challenge. That really was think of something no one's ever thought, you think that nobody's ever thought of before. And I thought I had it, of course. But, you know, like I figured out that there had been at one time that this old land was covered with water, you know. Down in Alabama, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Figured that out. I don't know how, but I did. And I had this whole scientific scheme, you know, how the mountains were, I know what a mountain was. Never been to a mountain before, you know. Never seen a mountain. But you know, how they were developed, and of course it turned out I was right. Well, somebody else had thought that before, though, long before me. But it got me to thinking, you know, originally, you know, and that's I guess the key. And began this little friendly competition we had with grades, and that's why I still approve of the grading as we have it, as we had it when I was in school, up that way. And honor system, use the A honor rolls and B honor rolls. I mean, that's why I'm in favor of that, because of the competition, you know, to make you think, you know, try to, if you don't have anything to challenge, you don't have anything, you're not going to go nowhere. And that's why I today believe that problems are great. Problems are great. They really are. They keep you think. And problems are the invention, the mother invention. I truly believe that.
Thank you for staying with us, and I'll see you again on Finance Thrive.